Thank you very much. Dr. Chayan Watana Puti, the convener of this seminar, Professor Victor King, the keynote speaker, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure on behalf of Chiang Mai University to welcome all of you to the city of Chiang Mai, to Chiang Mai University, and to this international seminar on Rethinking Development Studies in Southeast Asia, which is organized by the Center of ASEAN Studies and the Regional Center for Social Science and Sustainable Development of Chiang Mai University. Of course, organized by the director, Professor Chayan Watanaputi. As we all know and are aware of, that our ASEAN community is becoming a legal community by the end of this year. There are a number of issues that we need to rethink, reconceptualize in order to reposition ourselves when dealing with these challenges. The issues, whether it be the trans-border issue, the boundary migration, the human rights violations, environment problems, shortage of water, of course, which has an immense impact to the environment. As we all know, the construction of big dams at Mekong River has a great impact with people living down below the river. And that problem has become the problem of not only any particular country, community, but for the whole region, that we need to think and sit down and reconsider how to deal with this issue. Today, Chiang Mai people and also people in the north are suffering, as you perhaps can feel, the smog. The problem of the smog has become a regional issue, a challenge for us all, whether it's going to be the increasing of awareness or law enforcement, or some people told me it is purely an economic-based issue. Then we need to reconsider when talking about development studies in dealing with this problem. So I'm delighted that Dr. Chayan has organized this platform for us all to discuss, to share our experiences, our knowledge, so that we would be able to have outcomes through this networking. And I believe that the power of the networking is very important with addressing any particular issue. It will have an impact towards a way of thinking so that we can reposition ourselves in a better way. And once again, I should like to extend my sincere thanks to the organizing committee, the convener, Dr. Chayan, and especially to all the participants joining this seminar. And I wish you all every success and a pleasant stay in Chiang Mai. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Now we are pleased to have Dr. Chayan Watanaputi, Director of the Center for ASEAN Studies, Faculty of Social Science, Chiang Mai University, to deliver the introduction of the objective of this seminar. Dr. Chayan, please.
Thank you very much and welcome all of you. Some of you have come so far from Copenhagen to Chiang Mai, or from Pasau University from Chiang Mai. And of course, many of you are from the region. Make an effort to come to join this seminar, which is on Rethinking Development Study in Southeast Asia. And I would like to personally thank our Vice President Ron Jiranukon for eloquently explain and also capture the issue, the main issue that we should address in this seminar. I'm sure that all participants have, when they receive our invitation, they are really excited to come to this seminar to reflect upon what they have been doing in terms of teaching courses in development studies or engage in research, or as well as involved in debates on the concepts and theory that can be applicable as conceptual tools for the understanding of what has happening in this region. In fact, the background of this seminar is that I look from the perspective from our graduate program under the Center for Social Science and Sustainable Development. We have started this program 15 years ago. Most of our students are from the region, and of course some are from beyond. And at the beginning, our program, which was set up with the support of the Ford Foundation and later with Rockefeller Foundation. And we try to make our program relevant to the emerging issues in the region since the early 1990s, when the region became gradually integrated, becoming what is known as the Greater Mekong Subregion. And after a decade and a half, we have seen that we are witnessing many changes, some of which has been mentioned by the Vice President. But overarching phenomena that we have observed is the regional integration and the desire to become one community, ASEAN community. That is something which we really need to rethink about. What can we do as far as scholars and researchers, teaching involving in development studies? Should we rethink about the courses that we have been teaching? What kind of research agendas that our students should do? What kind of expectation from our society? Not only Thai society, but the region, Southeast Asian region. And what would be a conceptual tools that we should start to think about and search for a better heuristic device that can help us to better understand the rapid transformation in this region, particularly the impacts that will be upon the local people, their livelihood and their security. So we have two basic objectives and another supplementary objective. The first two would be, first we would like to invite all participants to reflect upon their experience in involving in development studies. What have we done? What do we learn from that? Can we compare our experience with our colleagues from Chulalongkorn University or from National University of Laos, or how colleagues from Myanmar would like to share with us what would be the appropriate, relevant development study program to be developed in Myanmar, for example. we also would like to facilitate exchanges of information, ideas, and of course, what can we work together in the future. The second would be, of course, we want to identify new challenges, the emerging issues of development study in this changing context of regional integration, particularly the development, particularly ASEAN community. This ASEAN community would be just hyper reality, which Professor Rudikoff have been in discussion with me. Is it real or just something that myopic in our imagination? Who will benefit from this? That's what is our question. So these are two main concerns that we would like to see. Of course, Professor Rome mentioned about smog in Chiang Mai. That is also highly associated with issue of not only with the economic aspects, but also the increase of urbanization in Chiang Mai and in the other areas around. We also should think about new issues about health. What would be, if you talk about health, if you talk about development study, should we talk about health in this new context? What kind of health problem that would be that we should pay attention to? And of course, we also think that we have been talking about development studies, about economic development, about resource management, but how about spiritual dimension of development? There are of course people have faced with social suffering, psycho-traumatization from migration, forced migration, and displacements, broken families, etc., etc. How can religion could play a role in this particular context? And please also remember that we, in our region, the issue of ethno-religious conflict is still going on, either in the southern part of the Philippines, southern part of Thailand, as well as in our neighboring countries. So all of these issues, new challenges, new issues that we need to really discuss. Of course, I'm a bit sorry that we have only 2 days for our seminar, and we have many people who would like to share ideas. So this is the dilemma that we have for this particular seminar. But this one will be not the last one. We hope that in the future we can have this kind of platform, and of course our colleagues who have been here, I hope that we can meet again in the next seminar. The third objective is that because we only have limited time for this particular seminar, several of the participants, our colleagues, has been very kind to me in writing papers. But I have to beg them that please do not deliver the full papers in this seminar, but just give short summary so that it can start. We can use this opportunity to start, discuss, and exchange ideas. Many have offered to me that after the seminar, we should come up with a plan to encourage participants to write papers and put together as an edited volume. My good friends, Professor Mbong from Malaysia and Panjawavi has already eager to do that, to help that, including Professor Suruchai from July. So this is our objective for this our ambitious objective of this conference. But of course, I'm sure that in the next 2 days, all of us, all of the participants, our friends and colleagues, will help this seminar to be a fruitful platform, learning from each other informally. There are people behind me. They are graduate students who have volunteered to take notes. Thank you very much for them. They'll have to work hard these next 2 days. And there are some video recording from the session, but we will ask you permission if we are going to do something about what you will share, what the ideas you share with us during the next 2 days. So we have 2 days seminar. First session of the morning, we'll hear from colleagues from Chulalongkorn University, from Royal University of Phnom Penh, from RCSD, and from National University of Laos. And after that, we will also hear from other universities, from Khon Kaen, from Mae Phra Luang, from Vietnamese German University. And of course, after this 1 day of sharing what we have been doing, then tomorrow we will deal with research agendas, research experience for all our students in doing research, and of course some interesting research project that our colleagues have been doing. And at the end, in the afternoon, of tomorrow's session, it will be an interesting session, and the session will be led by our colleagues, Professor Oscar Selaming and Professor Ludikov from Basel. They will give a short introduction of what they think about how to reconceptualize development study. Maybe there's something along that line. We are flexible. So tomorrow will be an exciting afternoon of what are the concepts that we should try to understand first, and whether they would be relevant, or do we need to think more about the concept that would be useful for our understanding of the field of development study, as well as the phenomena, the reality of development which is happening in Southeast Asia. That will be the plan for the next 2 days on seminar. So without further ado, I would give the floor to Professor Surichai to facilitate I will give the floor for the MC to invite Professor Victor King to give some introductory note for our seminar. Thank you very much.
Okay, now we are pleased to have Professor Victor King, Emeritus Professor, University of Leeds, School of Social, Oriental and African Studies, University of London, to deliver the speech on the overview of development studies. Professor King, please.
Thank you. Am I doing amplified here or? I've never mastered technology, I must say. Always a problem for me. Well, it's a great honor and privilege to be asked to kick off this session, commence this session. So I'm kicking. I wasn't quite sure how to construct this talk, and I wrote something about 3 months ago, 2-3 months ago, and a long PowerPoint presentation. And I know Dr. Xian is constantly saying, keep it short. So what I'll have to do is just skip through various slides. There is a narrative to the slides as well, so you can read those if you wish, rather than me going through it in some detail. What I thought I'd do, because I've been involved in multidisciplinary studies for most of my career. Southeast Asian studies, regional studies, East Asian studies, most recently in Leeds. I've worked in environmental studies. I'm now working in tourism and heritage studies. I've dipped in and out of what we're calling development studies, and I'm raising all kinds of issues about these multidisciplinary fields of study of our work. I've been doing that recently in relation to tourism studies, and recently in relation to Southeast Asian studies as well, and really saying, well, what is the rationale behind these collective terms, as it were, that we use, sometimes an almost kind of miscellaneous ragbag of things that we've thrown together, and which we refer to, in this case, as development studies. So I'll be questioning that, and I thought what I'd start with, and then I wondered why you'd asked me to commence the session, and I thought, well, maybe it was because of this rather clever title with my paper, sort of intriguing. I don't actually know what it means either, but as we go through it, you'll probably appreciate that I'm probably just as confused as you will be at the end of what I'm going to say. But what I wanted to say was that, I mean, I see development studies as part of a great philosophical tradition, obviously emerging from European thought in the first instance. And I'd like to reinforce the point that we shouldn't, we're critical of those concepts and theories that were generated really from the Enlightenment, from the 17th century. But what I'm suggesting is there doesn't seem to be anything that's strikingly new in this. Whenever I read a new piece coming out of the broad field of development studies, I reflect back on earlier work, historical work, and think, well, I've heard this before. It doesn't seem to me to be something that's strikingly new. So if I can... Can I... Sorry, I've lost the... Can I ask a technical expert to... I can't even operate the slides, unfortunately. Let's have a look. Well, I was going to say, what is development studies? And I thought it would be instructive to look at the European experience in this. I mean, I'm not so familiar. I'm familiar with some programs in this part of the world, but not across the region as a whole. And I guess there's quite a bit of diversity. But I think the interesting comparison to make with the European experience is what was called is called the Bologna process or protocol, where to encourage cross-fertilization, student mobility across countries, across programs and so on. The Bologna process and the Erasmus exchange program between students and universities and so on, it's appeared. Try to harmonize in some way development studies programs, primarily at the postgrad level. And this is a very positivist kind of exercise. So they distill out of this what they see as the essential ingredients of development studies programs. And I think I've pretty much summarized them there. They'll be familiar to you as a whole series of issues that they're listing as well. But clearly, multidisciplinarity, I think we still have a big problem whether or not we're truly interdisciplinary, but multidisciplinarity is important. The relationship between concepts, I wouldn't go so far as to say theories, but concepts and empirical data and problems. I mean, if development studies is nothing else, it's a problem-solving, policy-generating field of studies that is supported by sound academic study and conceptual development and so on. I think possibly Prof. Wanzawawi will be talking about this rather more in his address, but the relationship between local responses and things that emerge from below, as it were, in response to these larger scale processes of change that are affecting us all. So that seems to me to be a very positive way of looking at it, and I think it is problematical in certain respects, as I'll try to show you in a moment. Disciplines and subject areas, it's enormous. I mean, if you just dip into the literature on development studies, it covers so many disciplinary fields and so many subject areas. You begin to wonder, what is the rationale, as it were? What is the essential core of development studies in all of this? And this is partly symbolic, I suppose, but again, part of the Bologna process, to avoid, I suppose, what we might call Western dominance or hegemony of this particular subject area, the great stress on complementarity and partnership that we, through this Bologna process in the north, rather than a northern supply-driven development studies educational effort, should be more, the supply-driven should be more demand-driven in cooperation with universities in this part of the world and in other parts of the so-called developing world. Getting back to hegemony, what intrigued me was when I Googled it, development studies in Southeast Asian universities, development studies in Southeast Asia, development studies on Southeast Asia. You come up with a whole series of programs, both at the undergraduate level and the postgrad level, but when you actually look at it, unless I'm looking at the wrong Google site, the only thing that really appears strongly is this consortium within Thailand itself, the Consortium of Development Studies in Southeast Asia. That's featured quite strongly. And Chulalongkorn also has separate entries. But when you look, you scroll down this Google list, they are predominantly Western, Western programs, based in the UK, in the US, in continental Europe. Very few other programs within the Southeast Asian region certainly get featured, even if you put in a development studies program in Southeast Asian universities. And I think that's an important observation that we might want to return to a little bit later. We're going through a rethinking exercise. We've been through these time and time again. One of the major ones, of course, which again I'll briefly refer to, is a so-called impasse in development studies, which was begun to be conceptualized or reconceptualized in the 1980s, and a very close colleague of mine who I worked with in the University in Hull in those days, a sociologist, a man called David Booth, actually called together a series of senior development studies experts in the UK. He edited a book from that because he thought the regnant paradigm of modernization theory and the counter response under development and dependency were getting us nowhere. And we were also getting bogged down because he was very much from a more radical Marxist persuasion, getting thoroughly bogged down in underdevelopment, dependency, Marxist-inspired theories. So I think this is very instructive that we're now going through this rethinking exercise here. And we rethink for various reasons. Either that there's an impasse of some kind, it's problematical in some way, or we're rethinking because we're looking at opportunities, that there is a combination of factors, of processes that have come together to make it an ideal opportunity to rethink. So it needn't necessarily be a problematical thing that we're actually engaged in, but taking advantage of certain opportunities and regional opportunities in Southeast Asia. It's not operating again, sorry. Okay. Just going back to my own work, I suppose what I felt about development studies all along was that I'm very suspicious of these high-level theories, and I was very suspicious of the regnant paradigm, as it were, that Ruth McVeigh talks about in relation to modernization theory. I suppose it's the only paradigm, if you like, that approximates a paradigm. That's what I would argue, modernization theory. I don't think other so-called theories do, and I'll try to explain that later when we're in discussion. So what I'm saying is, I think we should abandon the search for these large-scale, these grand paradigms, as it were, and I'm much more comfortable operating at a lower level, conceptual level, more in touch, if you like, with on-the-ground realities, with empirical work, with practical problems and with problem solving, and emphasizing very much case specificity, I think, the specific contextualization of problems and processes. And that was what I was trying to do in some of my earlier work, the general book I wrote on anthropology and development in Southeast Asia, and then various other case material that I've been involved in over the years, relationship between concept, policy, practice, empirical data, whether it be in work that I did on issues in rural development in Malaysia, environmental change in the 1990s, resettlement, land development schemes, and so on. And this is where I go back to antecedents. I think it's terribly important in, we don't want to be too preoccupied with history, but I think it's important in our teaching in development studies programs that we link this with the thinking of the past, if you like. And in Southeast Asia, I suppose, for me at least, as a sociologist, anthropologist, largely from people like John Sydenham Furnival, Bernard Schrieka. This is Julius Bucher, economic dualism, economic theory, the famous Dutch economist. And so what I'm saying, to rethink, we have to go back to the sources of our ideas and consider what it is that we wish to propose as novel, and much perhaps what we do propose as novel has already been expressed, perhaps in a different form from how we would wish it, but nevertheless has been expressed. And you go back even further. I'll just scoot through these slides, I don't have time, but I suppose Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, I think he's a grand figure, John Locke in the top right, David Hume. When they were really talking about what modernization theory was talking about in the 1950s and 1960s, and importantly the relationship between politics and the economy, between the nation state that was emerging in Europe at that time and the marketplace, and how wealth was created and where it came from and so on, and the movement away from what they saw as a traditional order to something that they saw as modern, which would overturn tradition and so on. And they were talking about the unity of humankind as well in those early years. And the seeds of modernization, of course, Adam Smith, David Ricardo, and others, the bringing together of concerns about politics, political context, and the emerging global order, and the marketplace, and the economy, and economic growth. And the antecedents, not exactly underdevelopment and dependency, but some of the ideas, the suspicions about the positive direction of change that Adam Smith and others were talking about were captured way, way back by Thomas More, Robert Owen, social utopianism. And I suppose one of my heroes, William Morris. There was just an exhibition recently on Morris from his work in the later 19th, early 20th century, the so-called arts and crafts movement, the great suspicion about this, the negative consequences of industrialization and modernization and what else could be put in its place. And that's really where utopianism and so on came from, the desire to rediscover some kind of pre-industrial organic society. This all sounds very modern when you look at it. They were talking about things like communal ownership, gender equality in education, way, way back at that time. And the desire, to nourish the social, the human and social condition. That, I suppose, is my breakdown, and these overlap quite considerably, my breakdown of the passions, as it were, in development studies going back to the 1950s, 1960s. I think we could probably take it on a bit more now from globalization in the 1990s. I put David Booth in the en passe there. He published that work in 1985. And this is where I see the problems with paradigms, because we've got to handle complexity in some way and differentiation. But I see a paradigm, as I say there, as a coherent, self-sustaining, all-embracing, agreed-upon set of ideas and so on. And I just wonder whether we're actually talking about paradigms in the true sense in which I mean paradigmatic. And they're also, of course, trying to capture things like the problem of the nation state. A lot of this is a continuation, though, of economic growth models. Though critical of modernization theory, really they're just building, it seems to me, on ideas that were around before then. And I suppose that's the question: are we dealing with a field of studies here in development studies? Is it defined? Is it distinctive? Is it coherent? How does it extend into other subject areas, and what complications does that generate? Are we merely stacking up ideas rather than replacing one paradigm by another? But the rationale behind all of this seems to me to be the preoccupation with change, improvement, and progress. And again, I suppose I go back, when I'm lecturing, teaching in development studies, to 19th century thought about industrialization, evolutionary change, things of that kind. I suppose these are the four that I would single out for special attention. Auguste Comte, of course, I suppose the person who, in some respects, invented or created sociology, modern sociology. Lewis Henry Morgan, top right, Herbert Spencer, and Edward Bernard Tyler, bottom left, famous evolutionist. And yet, again, the counteraction, as it were, the counter to all of that, Thomas Malthus, the limits to growth, the problems about population growth and sustainability, and Ruskin in the bottom right. In competition, there are always winners and losers, these two men were saying. And those two, of course, where you begin to get, from the late 19th century into the early 20th century, the increasing concerns about globalization and how to handle it, of course. I suppose the four great theorists of imperialism at that time, Lenin, Nikolai Bukharin in the bottom right, Rosa Luxemburg, and Rudolf Hilferding. And then the future. Again, these two guys were trying to understand, grapple with complexity. Ferdinand Tönnies and Karl Popper, I suppose, and trying to respond to the question, is development imminent in the way in which Hegel talked about it, or is it engineered in some way, as Tönnies and Popper were arguing. I'll just try to bring this up to date now and then finish. I think we have to contemplate these Millennium Goals that the UN set out. Very interesting, isn't it? Largely a preoccupation with gender, with the position of women, women's health as well, children, child mortality, the argument about developing partnerships and things of that kind. One of the major problems, it seems to me, that we're facing in the West, which is a developmental issue. We're not just talking now about the so-called developing world, but there are major problems in Western countries, in Western Europe in particular, is about young people, youth, young men, unemployed men, disaffected men, and so on. Doesn't appear at all here, doesn't come on that agenda at all. It's a big problem in Southeast Asia. I've been recently working in Brunei, a relatively wealthy country, oil-rich, small population, a huge welfare system, state-supported and so on. Youth unemployment, young men who cannot get jobs or who are not committed to getting work. What do we do about them? And those issues then spill over into things like drug-related matters, problems, and so on. The future continued, the World Bank, this is their agenda. You go back to World Bank reports, 2010, climate was the big one then. 2011, security. 2012, gender. 2013, jobs. 2014, risk and opportunity. Current one, World Development Report 2015, they call it minds, society, and behavior. Very interesting set of ideas which we might want to debate. They're looking now at 2016, internet. and the relationship between electronic media and the internet and development. But all of this, it seems, I mean, if you look at those reports, they're all pushed by, it seems to me, a broadly modernization frame of reference. Growth, its effects, its inhibitors, and its facilitators. And the future continued, United Nations Development Programme, Human Development Report 2014, references to Southeast Asia here, what should be the future, obviously regional cooperation, closing gaps between ASEAN members. They're talking about benchmarks for progress, reliable data that we can base our work, our thinking, our policies, and our practices on, good practice, policy proposals and tools, and stakeholder cooperation. Those are the issues that the UN puts forward for this part of the world. The DSA in the United Kingdom, it has a set of study groups. This is what exercises the DSA in relation to groups of academics and practitioners and others. So they have study groups on aging, business, management, gender and women, rising powers, information technology, media, NGOs, poverty, well-being, and psychology. And more. Aid, trade, and investment. A lot of this is about sustainability, sustainable human development. Security, interethnic violence and genocide, trafficking, transnational crime, and so on. Final reflections, and then I'll just finish here. I suppose this is really where I've been involved in this much more recently in the field of tourism. I'm looking at tourism and development issues, and I'm looking here again at the interaction between economic growth, mass tourism, if you like, mass tourism development, and critiques of that in relation to sustainability, alternative forms of tourism, and so on. And this is what I was involved in some years ago, and I come back, and I'll finish here. The whole point about relationship between concepts, methods as well, and practical work on the ground and policy formulation. This is when I was working on rural development issues in Malaysia, what I was trying to do, a whole range of methods that we were adopting at that time, resettlement and dam schemes that I was involved in as well, and climate change, even then, the whole problem of forest destruction. We did a major comparative study in Borneo, looking at one area that was very prone to drought with deforestation, and another area which was coping much better than that, and trying to put together a whole range of methods with satellite imagery, high-level aerial photography, and then trying to source that on the ground and connect up that macro level with a micro level. And then two, rainforest and climate change. These were all taken from Borneo, from Sarawak and Sabah, where we were working. And then very finally, final questions. Do development studies have the solutions to the problems, and who determines the problems to be solved? Is it a means of control, development work, symbolically constructed, with a right to intervene? Are development practices and plans relative and contingent, not all powerful, all-knowing scientific devices? Go back to A.F. Robertson's People and the State, published in the 1980s, a terrific book where he did a case study of Malaysia there, about development practices and policies as some kind of magical operation that is not scientific based. And what are the relationships then between expert knowledge and local or indigenous knowledge? And then very, very finally, could I have pursued those research projects that I've just given you without a development studies frame of reference? Yes. I needn't have been working in something called development studies at that time. I could have done it from a sociological, anthropological perspective, because what I was looking at were local problems, issues, adaptations, and responses, and I was contextualizing those in a national and global way. And I was seeking input from other disciplines as well, and I was feeding research into user constituencies. But I didn't really see that as specifically development studies at that time. And finally, do these constitute development studies projects, or are they merely studies in anthropology or sociology or rural sociology? Are they in area studies, tourism studies, environmental studies, community studies and stroke rural studies. Where do we place ourselves in all of this? So I'm sort of raising the question about the constitution of development studies and what its rationale, what its essence, as it were, is. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.